Hello and welcome to this Magna-Matic Tip of the Week video where we will be talking about our belt grinder, the Mag 8200, and some specifics about belts and troubleshooting belts. We'll be going through tracking and some information specific to all belt grinders as well as to the Mag 8200. Here on the table in front of me we have a sampling of some of the belts, the abrasive belts that we use on our machines. The 2-inch wide belts here are used on the Mag 8200 belt grinders, and the blue belt here is used on the Mag 6000 hedge trimmer blade sharpener. Now, one of the things to understand about abrasive belts and belt grinders, and this is a universal piece of information for really all belt grinders, there are always a range of tolerances when all things are manufactured. Belts are no different. So what I'm referring to is that really in all abrasive belts, the lengths can vary slightly. You can see these seams in the belts. They're blue here on these two, and the seam here is kind of pink on this belt. The seams are never absolutely perfect. You can see they're actually joined with a type of fiber tape. Now, what can happen is if you have some variance in the belt length, that is why all belt grinders will have some type of tracking or trim adjustment. This will be to align the belt onto the two wheels so that it tracks down the center of the wheels. Now this is achieved also by crowning the wheels on some idler pulleys and things of that nature as well, but no matter what, all belt grinders typically require some kind of tracking or trim adjustment, because if they don't, the varying seams and lengths will have that belt walk. I'm sure all of you have experienced this with other belt grinders. When you put a new belt on from a worn belt, you may have to adjust this. Now let's take a quick closer look on the Mag 8200, how we adjust the tracking or trim of belts, and we'll go through the process of adjusting a new belt. Here we have a Mag 8200 BM. It's a belt grinder with the modular work table. B is for the belt, M is for the modular work table, and we will open this up here and change the belt. Undo the two catch clamps, the front cover comes off. We use the crank handle to raise the whole assembly up, and what you'll see happen here is this block will interfere with that bolt head and give us a point to pivot against. Using the crank handle to stretch the springs, the old belt can come out and the new belt can be placed into the machine. Now you'll remember earlier we talked about where the seam was. It can happen if you find that a belt is walking, not staying and tracking, and let's say you had taken it out for some reason and put the same belt back in. So here we have our seam. If the belt came off in this direction and we now flip this and put it on the other direction, you may see some variance in the tracking because of the seam. But if you were to put it on the same way you took it off, you would generally see no change in the tracking. Now we have the belt on the contact wheel and the idler pulley. We can now lower the crank, which allows the spring tension to be put back onto the idler pulley, and we can bring the wheel down a little bit. The first thing before we turn the machine on, we should check the tracking with the machine off just by hand. And we can turn the wheel like this and we can see if the belt is tracking on its own. And this one is, at least at that speed. We can replace the front cover. Find your T-handle wrench, which fits here. This is the idler pulley adjustment or tracking adjustment or trim adjustment. When you turn this clockwise, the belt will move away from you towards the back of the machine. When you turn this counterclockwise, the belt will come towards you. Now we haven't turned the machine on yet. We've checked the tracking by hand just with finger speed. We'll now quickly turn the machine on and then off to see if the belt is tracking. And this belt is tracking. It does not need any adjustment. Now I'll bring the camera in for a closer view and make some adjustments to the tracking so that you can see the belt walk on the wheel when we turn this wrench in the adjustment. Here we have a view of the new belt that we placed onto the Mag 8200, and I will now make some adjustments to the tracking while the machine is on. Normally, please make these tracking adjustments with the safety guards in place. I am doing this with the safety guard removed simply so that you have a better view of the movement of the belt on the contact wheel and idler pulley. So here is that demonstration. Again, to quickly review, clockwise made the belt go towards the back of the machine, counterclockwise made it move towards us. I hope that in that demonstration you noticed that I made very small turns with the T-handle wrench to get the belt to move. It must be noted that this tracking adjustment is very sensitive. It takes hardly anything of a turn, sometimes an eighth or a quarter turn, and the belt will move quite significantly. So when you make these adjustments, please be gentle so that you can see the adjustments when they happen. Just so you have a little better understanding how we designed the tracking or trim adjustment, I'll take the front cover off and you can see the components here. Here, of course, is the contact wheel, and here is the idler pulley with the trim adjustment. I have one of these assemblies out of a machine so that you can see it. So here is the idler pulley with that trim adjustment. There is a spring behind here that keeps a position of this pivot. This rod or shaft is inside a set of bearings. That's what gives us our pivot. The tracking adjustment is, again, how much you turn this screw in or out will cant the pulley, allowing you to adjust that tracking. As you can also possibly tell here from the video, the idler pulley is crowned significantly also to get it to track in center. And then this shoulder bolt at the bottom are where the two springs connect, so that this is under spring tension, keeping that belt tight. Now that we've shown you how to change a belt, how to track the belt, and we've talked a little bit about why all belt grinders require some kind of tracking due to the varying seams and lengths and the tolerances of abrasive belts, we should talk about some of the troubleshooting of why you might be getting some odd tracking or things that can happen with really all belt grinders. So one of the first things to talk about is the belt tracking while grinding a mower blade. Now, something unique to our machine, when you're sharpening a lawnmower blade, we are perpendicular to the rotation of this wheel. It is important that when you are grinding against a belt grinder, that you are relatively square to the face of the abrasive. If you are coming at a relatively extreme angle to the belt, and let's say only contacting half of the belt because you're coming with the blade at such an extreme angle, you are putting more force in a smaller surface area on the contact wheel. This can cause you, the operator, to actually pull and push the belt, where you can see yourself manipulate the tracking with the lawnmower blade as you're pushing against the contact wheel. Now, if you're pushing square and across most of the 2-inch wide surface of the contact wheel, it is generally unlikely that you'll see the belt walk or move at all while grinding. It has a lot to do with how square or how much full pressure you're putting against the contact wheel. Another question we get sometimes is some belts, depending again on their length and seam, when the machine is turned off and the belt comes to rest, you'll see that the belt might be hanging off the contact wheel maybe an 1/8 inch or so. But when you turn the machine back on, it will go right back to center. That is perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that as long as the belt is tracking in center while the machine is on. Another troubleshooting reason for a belt that might be walking a lot as you're using it, or even as it's just running, is that the belt is near the end of its life and has stretched out a lot, and we're not getting adequate spring tension on that worn belt. And at that point, it would be best to just try a new belt, and the problem will most likely go away. Another potential reason for a belt not tracking in center is if there was damage to the rubber contact wheel. Now, this is a good point to notice a difference between grinding wheels and belt grinders. Okay, and this is universal for all belt grinders and grinding wheel machines. On lawnmower blades, we have this interior portion of the cutting edge that is rounded. This is rounded because of when the milling machine came through here, cut this edge on, as it was exiting, it left a curve. Typically, when people are used to a machine with a grinding wheel, they're able to bump against this interior corner against the side of the grinding wheel. Now, the side of a grinding wheel cuts. That's okay when talking about a grinding wheel. However, if you run into the side of a contact wheel or the belt, this is where you can potentially tear the belt as well as tear out chunks of rubber in the contact wheel. So it is important that when you're doing these interior edges, you stop a little short with any belt grinder so as not to damage the contact wheel, because as I stated before, if chunks are out of the contact wheel, that may not allow the belt to track in center. Now let's discuss some of the potential mechanical issues why a belt might not track in center. When we're looking at the idler pulley assembly, as we mentioned before, this idler pulley is crowned. If this crown gets worn down over time, which can happen over many, many hours of grinding, if this idler pulley is now relatively flat and has worn the crown away, your belt may not track very well. Now, that's generally unlikely. This idler pulley will have a long life. The next potential is that where I mentioned there are 2 springs down below here that connect from the back portion of the machine to this idler pulley, and that is what's pulling tension on the belt right now. If those springs have worn out and they no longer have the pull force to keep adequate tension on the abrasive belt, that would be another potential mechanical part that may need replacement if the belt is not tracking consistently. The next thing is, of course, there are 2 bearings inside of this idler pulley. If the bearings are worn out, that would also create inconsistent tracking for an abrasive belt. So if you, first of all, you can visually check if your idler pulley is still crowned. As you can see in some other videos, this assembly comes out very easily out of the machine, that you can inspect it and check the bearings and feel if the bearings are still tight and running true. 2 more conditions to look for if a belt is not tracking consistently is if there's any damage to the belt. If there are tears in the side of the belt, that will also affect its tracking. If you find that the belt is not maintaining consistent tracking, it can also be due to varying cutting edge angles. So when you adjust your modular work table and pivot this table at, let's say, 30, 40, or 45, there is a different spring tension on than at 30 degrees. And this leads back to potentially springs being worn out or just losing their tension, that the springs might have to be replaced if you find that the belt tracking changes a lot when you're changing angles. Those two things can be related. So taking a look at the springs or potentially replacing the springs if you find the belt walks a lot during angle changes. Another thing to pay attention to is when turning the Mag 8200 off and as the wheel is slowing down and coming to a stop, you notice that the belt tracks a little bit off of the contact wheel. This will generally be maybe around an 1/8 inch or so. This is okay as long as when you turn the machine on, it goes back to center. That is perfectly okay. That is just due to the shape of that particular belt. The next belt you put on may not have that condition. Earlier in the video, I had spoken about when sharpening a blade, if you are able to manipulate the tracking with the pressure of the lawnmower blade, keep in mind a variance of around an 1/8 inch of the belt coming off the wheel and going back to center is okay. But again, just like we spoke about earlier, that is usually due to the operator not being square with the contact wheel or square with the abrasive belt. You're probably slightly at an angle and putting a lot of pressure in a smaller area, concentrating that force, and that allows you to kind of drag the belt off of the contact wheel via your pressure. Now, I know we spent a lot of time talking about the Mag 8200, but the Mag 6000 hedge trimmer blade sharpener is also a belt grinder and will have those same situations that we talked about on the 8200. A couple differences is that the Mag 6000's trim or tracking adjustment is not quite as sensitive. You actually have to make more rotations to manipulate the belt. Some of the things we mentioned about the Mag 8200 in troubleshooting some of the possibilities may never happen with the Mag 6000, largely because the Mag 6000's abrasive belt is moving quite a bit slower than the 8200. Naturally, hedge trimmer blades do not need as much steel removed per sharpening as, let's say, a lawnmower blade. Usually lawnmower blades require significant steel removal to recondition them and sharpen them, getting their tips back again. So a lot of the tracking and other things happen far less with the hedge trimmer blade sharpener, again because of its speed, also because you don't have the problem of hitting the inside of the cutting edge. Another difference between the Mag 6000 and the Mag 8200 is here we are against a hard steel backer for the belt, so the belt has a little bit different support versus a rubber contact wheel. But all of the same principles hold true with the 6000 and to the 8200, as well as any belt grinder, in that tracking adjustment has to be done because of variance in abrasive belts. And naturally with any belt grinder, whether it's the 8200, the 6000, or any other generic belt grinder, all of these same principles hold true as far as maintenance goes. If bearings are going, if spring tension is not held, or if pulleys have worn, these are all things that will affect the tracking and the consistency of the tracking. Another common question that people ask about the Mag 8200 is if our abrasive belts are okay with the water-cooled units. And absolutely, we have designed specifically with Norton abrasives and what coolant we're using and the design of the Mag 8200 that all of our abrasive belts can also be run with our water-cooled machine. So whether you run it dry or water-cooled, you're using the same belts. Well, I certainly hope you found this video informative and interesting in relationship to abrasive belts. And again, all of our abrasive belts you can find at Magna-Matic.com. If you need parts, if you need bearings, springs, or any of the other things, we have those all listed at our online store. And another thing to mention, even though we talked about a lot of potential problems with abrasive belts, we do use exclusively Norton abrasives, which are a very high quality abrasive that are made in the United States, and generally speaking, their consistency and tolerances are very good. But that's not to say that one belt out of however many can have a little bit more length and then have different tracking. So again, that's why we have those adjustments designed into the machines. If you have any other questions, certainly feel free to call us at 800-328-1110 or reach out to us on our website. I thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe for content like this.